Okay, so yeah, merchandise planning for success. And to me, that's almost doubling up, because merchandise planning is about success with your inventory management and your profitability. So I'm going to just try and talk you through a few ideas around what merchandise planning is and how it can help you in your business. I'll start off with a little bit about us as a company. So Smart & Planning, we're a merchandise planning company. We work with retailers, excuse me, and wholesalers, and hybrids of the two. And we provide solutions and services and support around merchandise planning. It's a highly specialized field, and it is a business critical field because it really sits right at the center of that inventory management. Everything we've done in our extensive careers to date is now leveraged as a service to the businesses that we work with. So the reason I mention that is because it's probably easiest to describe who we are as a company, describing us as consultants. But I almost always try not to describe us as consultants, because my background is actually merchandise planning. I'm a planner on steroids with executive experience, and my team are all actually people with planning backgrounds who have worked with a variety of different retailers and across a variety of different products. And so it's literally that hands-on service and expertise that we bring to our clients. So we're probably less in that consulting space, but because it's a service that we're offering, it's just sort of easier to describe it that way sometimes. And the other thing that I should touch on early on, and it's in that last statement there on the screen, is bringing together the art and the science of merchandise planning. So for those who have perhaps come across planning before, it can sometimes be considered quite a numeric activity, quite buried in the numbers, buried in the reports, and sometimes quite black and white in terms of the history says this and the numbers say this, and computer says no when it comes to spending more money from an open to buy point of view. And so I wanted to call it out really early on that that's not the style of merchandise planning that I personally learned and that I've built my career on, and it's not the style of planning that I practice. For me, that art and science phrase really does capture it. There is a lot of science behind merchandise planning because it is very analytical and it is very data driven. But at the same time, it really does need to be commercial and contextual. And so I just wanted to call that out now, because a few slides on, I will show you some numbers and I don't want to scare you with that. I'll only spend a moment here. In terms of my background, I've been in this space for over 25 years. My last employed role before starting Smart & Planning a bit over 8 years ago was heading up planning for the Cotton On Group. So I was looking after that function in the business across all of their brands globally, and evolving merchandise planning as a process within the business, obviously overseeing the team, managing that whole function.
And can I just say, Susan, like what a role that must have been. Like, honestly, I can't even conceive, like, if you guys think about all the Cotton On Group, all their stores amongst their brands, and their current stock, their new stock, their sale stock, like, holy shit, girlfriend, what a role.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I loved working with them. They're an unbelievable business, and so fast paced. I mean, there were times we were opening over 200 stores a year, globally across all the brands. And it's an amazing culture because it's a very driven culture, but very much about let's make things happen. Speed over perfection. We'll figure out some of the stuff after the fact. Let's just rather keep moving forward, fail fast, fail forward, that kind of thinking. And then we'll go and improve later on. But yeah, just exactly what you said, Lisa. I couldn't resist the role. I was sitting here in Sydney when they contacted me about it, and I was like, oh no, I've already moved halfway across the world. I'm not moving to Geelong. Thank you very much. But and they were quite under the radar at the time. You couldn't research them very well. But the more I learned about them, the more I thought, oh my goodness, I don't think I can refuse this. This would be the biggest, opportunity in planning that's likely to cross my path. And I loved it. And it, different things you do make you fit for different types of activities. And that definitely got me fit for being across a lot of different things, which was a great starting point for Smart & Planning, because I was used to being across 8 different businesses across 13, 17 different countries. it meant that, you know, I built that fitness. So I've noticed that through my career, different things get you sort of fit for different things. So yeah, that was my last employed role. But, you know, in the time that we've been operating Smart and Planning, we've worked with over 100 businesses and brands, quite a lot over that actually now, with a combined annual turnover in excess of $20 billion. And that's because some of the guys that we've worked with, they're really big players, like the Cotton Ons, you know, multi-billion-dollar turnover businesses. But equally, we work with businesses right at the start of their journey. We work with startups, and we work with pure play e-commerce businesses, and, you know, businesses that are turning over, you know, just a few million, or making their way there, and the different challenges that they experience on that curve as well. So we're right across that whole spectrum. So and it's interesting. It's interesting on my side of the table. It's interesting to notice how common some of the challenges are that are experienced all the way through. And that brings me back to merchandise planning, because quite often it's that merchandise planning approach that is that's lacking or needs to be evolved, and makes that difference for them to sort of get through and break through to the next stage in their scale. So yes.
Yeah, sorry, while just on that point, like, I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing that I would observe is that merchandising can also wreck businesses, right? So not only is it the key for growth, but it's also the key that undoes many businesses: too much stock, or the wrong stock, or not enough stock. So definitely, I think this is a really very important topic.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. You spot on with that. And you know, I had a phone call yesterday from a business that we worked with many years ago already, asking me to come back in and sort of do a bit of a diagnostic, because they've done a lot of growing, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of international expansion, and they've found themselves in a really overstocked position. They've probably, you know, run a bit fast, let go of some of those principles that they had in place early on, and it's snuck up on them. And these are challenging times as well. So it really, you know, again, it's why I don't talk about our clients by name, because I feel like it's important to keep things quite, you know, confidential in that space. But there are definitely, I can say, darlings of industry. There's some businesses that definitely make the headlines and have achieved some amazing things, but I get to look under the hoods of a lot of them, and their inventory can really trip them up, and sometimes it's what sees them fold. So it can definitely be your friend or your foe, and yeah, worth getting a handle on. So if I come back to what is merchandise planning, and so the definition on the screen is one that took me years to actually come up with. It's about maximizing sales and profit through optimizing inventory. And inventory really is that lever. There's different ways we can sort of work with it, but it really is the main thing we've got to play with to really achieve those sales and maximize the profit. So what we're trying to do is understand and interpret and shape the data that's available into something meaningful that we can actually base decisions on, because there aren't right answers. There aren't perfect answers. All you can really do is take the information that's available to you, look at it in the right way, if I can put it like that, so that you can draw meaning from it and base decisions on that, as opposed to only going with gut or being too nervous to make decisions because you're just really not sure. It gives you something to sort of center yourself around, to ground those decisions and to go, I'm playing my best card. Given what I know, given what might happen, given scenarios, this is the best move that I can make. And so that's where the data and analysis comes in. It's about interpreting those numbers, but again, the art and the science, not taking the numbers so literally, not going, you know, X is good and Y is bad, and consistently making decisions on those same thresholds. I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody on this call that retail is dynamic and ever changing. And it's really about finding those things that are the right levels and the right measures in your business. You know, when I sit down with businesses and chat with founders, and they know their business inside out, and actually their gut feel is very often on track. This is about backing that up with some statistics, some analysis to be able to go, yes, I really feel confident about that now. What I thought I was seeing, what I thought I was feeling, it's real. And now I feel better about that decision that I need to make. I feel better about that stock that I need to commit. So I hope that sort of gives you a good starting point in terms of what are we actually trying to do here, because if I think back to early days in my career, it was just about doing the job. It was about doing the tasks in the job. And I had to really, sort of step back from that and go, why are we doing all of this? What is this all about? And that statement there really captures it for me. We want to maximize sales and profit through optimizing inventory. And profit needs to be there because too often I do see businesses chasing sales at all costs. And it tends to be a short-term strategy. It's so important to be building in that profitability along the way. So jumping right into what are some of the challenges that I see going on at the moment. What are people grappling with? And there are some things that are very challenging at the moment. I think at the best of times, budgeting in itself, and I don't mean budgeting in a strictly financial sense, I mean budgeting in a merchandise sense, can be difficult because very often people don't know where to start. Well, what do I do? What do I look at anyway? It's one thing managing your P&L, but then when it gets to actually coming up with an inventory budget, where do I start? So a lot of businesses, even in simpler times, struggled a bit with that step. That's become so much more difficult now because we have this instability that we've experienced globally. In the past, a lot of businesses would have gone, oh, well, we're going to do what we did last year plus a little bit, or, plus a new store or whatever it might be. But that formula isn't really holding very well anymore because of, disrupted supply chain, disruptions in consumer demand, and even keeping an eye on your competitors, I think, is becoming more difficult because they're experiencing the same changes. So, their marketing plans all been shuffled around, their stockouts are bumping them around. And so even those patterns are getting broken up a little bit. Another one is assortment. So literally the width of your offer, how many options are you offering, and the depth, how much volume do you put behind each of those? What I am seeing a lot, particularly with design-led businesses, so often a founder who also is the creative behind the business, and often starting in a wholesale space and then going into retail through their own e-com store. This assortment trade-off and where best to invest their money is definitely a challenge at the moment. And part of what's actually making them realize that is potentially a problem is actually production capability. They're bumping into their own limitations on their production to actually put together the full range that they're designing. But it's so hard to go, well, how long is that piece of string, and how do I decide how many options is enough, how much choice is enough? And so that is definitely a merchandise planning function to help determine that option width and depth. And then the other thing, which may be less relevant for this audience, but I'm seeing quite a lot of businesses as they sort of scale, when they have a few stores, they're building a micro bottom up range and building it per store, because they know each store, they know the demographic and so on. But as they then try and scale beyond maybe 5 or 6 stores, that model comes undone because it's just not sustainable to keep curating so many individual ranges and then roll those up into a collection. And it needs to shift at that point to more of a bottom up, more of a top down approach. So those are some of the things that are sort of hitting us at the moment. But within all of it, the question is sort of really where to start. Like, what would actually move the needle for a lot of businesses? And I think particularly for this group, I really believe that a top-down strategic view is a very strong place to start, because I think this is something a lot of businesses skip over altogether, a little bit like what I was saying with my early career, where I was doing the job, I was doing all the activities, I was, building the range, and I was, sending it to stores, and I was doing markdowns and all of that business as usual. But if you come back to, I'm trying to maximize sales and profit, and I'm going to do that through optimizing my inventory, starting with that high level strategic view is really key. And, that theme comes through in so many other, parts of business that, that begin with the end in mind and so on. And so for that, I really do believe that a top-down approach as a starting point is the right starting point. And there's a couple of principles that I would attach to that as well. And one is that sales drives stock. So I'll unpack that for you a little bit. It's a principle that I learned like practically day one in my planning career. And what it means literally is you first set your sales plan. You first determine how much sales are you going to do. And that's underpinned by any number of things, your promotional plan, what events are going on, when are the drops of, newness into your business and that you're going to make a noise about and so on. But it's first about what is that realistic sales plan. There is, in terms of market share, that moves very, very slowly, moving from X% market share to a bigger percent. That's, acquiring extra customers. They're slightly slower things to change. So when you're building that sales plan, and so I say realistic, I don't mean it's not a strive plan. I'm not saying don't strive for growth, but I'm saying what's realistic. And by realistic, I mean it has substance behind it. What is actually going to make you achieve X amount of sales in July and X amount of sales in August versus last year? What underpins that? And the answer can't just be buying the stock. And that's why I say sales drive stock, not the other way around. And I think it is a mistake that a lot of businesses make, is they first go and buy the stock. And this is where this overstock cycle can eventuate, because if you first buy the stock because it's about putting together the range, which is the part that's more in the comfort zone, it's the part that's more accessible, it's how people know how to do that step, particularly if they are product people, if they're creative people, if they know their customer and their market really well. That's a very tangible place to be operating, and it's, of course, you have to put ranges together and sell them. That's how the cycle works. But if you start with that, you really put yourself in a position of maybe too much, too little, and the connection between that stock investment and the sales that you can actually achieve isn't there. And just because you have the stock doesn't mean you're going to sell it. Doesn't mean you have the demand to consume that stock. So it needs to start the other way around. It needs to start that you determine a realistic sales plan, then you go and invest in the stock to achieve that plan. And alongside,
sorry, will you unpack that a little? Because I think that is a really important thing to talk about.
Yes.
Are you going to unpack that a little more in the presentation?
Yes, I am. In a couple more slides, I'll explain it a little
Brilliant.
more.
Thank you, Hun.
So another principle that goes along with that is always in motion or aim. And by that, I mean stock needs to always be moving. So anytime that your stock is sitting still, not achieving a good enough rate of sale or velocity, it's costing you money. The profitability is just dripping out of it when it's sitting on shelves, sitting in a distribution center. Anytime it's not moving is not a good thing. So why I'm raising that as well is because often the concept of markdowns, is sort of a little bit, people don't want to go there. They're worried that it's going to damage the brand. And I recognize all of those considerations. But at the same time, stock doesn't become more attractive than when it first launched. It doesn't become more valuable than when it first launched. And sometimes what you need to do is take the edge off, turn it back into cash so you can reinvest it into areas that are performing for you based on analysis. But you want to just keep it always moving and always pumping through, because if you let it sit, when you do eventually manage to sell it, you're going to sell it for less profit than you could have early days. There's expression that your first markdown is your best one, and that's proven to be true more times than I can remember. So those two principles, first about sales driving your stock, and then just making sure that your stock is always in motion and being really tuned into what is the speed at which that stock is moving, and keeping an eye on the KPIs that will help you measure that. One of which is a simple sell-through calculation. So just taking your sales divided by your available stock, you can just do it even in units. If I have 10 units available and I've sold 7 out of 10 in a particular time period, whether that's a week or I'd hope it would be a week for those sorts of numbers. That's effectively a 70% sell through. I've sold through 70% of the stock that I had available. That's a strong number. And monitoring, your sell through of your stock on a weekly basis and then cumulatively into a month will help you identify which are the ones that are working for you, which are the ones that you can reinvest back into, or an interpretation of them, a move on from them, which are the ones that are holding you back, that aren't in motion. They need some attention. They need to be marked down. And then you also need to be looking forward to make sure that in your forward commitments, if you've got more of that, what can you do with that stuff? Can you recut it, recolor it, reduce the volume behind it, those sorts of things. So planning's both about the now and about the future, and we're usually actually sitting in both time, sort of like a time continuum. We're sort of time traveling, we're tinkering in the now, and we're also influencing the future. So just looking at the overall merchandise cycle just briefly now, probably each of these steps are things that would be happening in any retail business. They may or may not all have been lumped under a label that says planning. And certainly within each of them, there are activities that are very specifically planning activities. But the one that I've started talking about a little bit and that I mostly will be focusing on for this conversation is zooming into that plan area. And so that's what you were asking about, Lisa, as well. I unpack that, start with sales. So you can see step one there is strategy, and I know, I'm sure most businesses have a strategy of some sort, whether they've gone and really fleshed it out in paper and covered all the different components that a strategy could. I see that to very varying degrees. Following on from that is a financial plan of some sort. Or if that isn't what happens next, I suggest that is what should happen next. Really understanding what sales will we achieve, what stock is required to achieve those sales, and what margin will it deliver. That is the recipe of staying in business in retail. There has to be that margin outcome. You have to be able to sustain it. And really I can't stress enough how important I think it is to have this first step right. Everything else in the cycle flows on from this. If you don't have this in place, it's very hard to know how you're going. It's very hard to get out of the hand-to-mouth, rush that can be a retail existence. To be able to step back and go, how am I tracking versus what I set out to do? Is this actually taking me where I need to go? Where is my stock going to land up in a future period? How is my profitability tracking? All of those readings in your business fall into that plan, and I'll unpack that more in a moment. So if you haven't already gathered, I'm super passionate about this particular step, and I feel like it is a step that does get glossed over or neglected, and largely because people aren't sure how to do it. So I don't know if I'm speaking to anybody, if any of you are sitting there going, oh, yes, that's me. Or maybe you hadn't sort of thought about it that way, but, all the rest of them, they just sort of flow on, putting together the range and selling the product and trading it and so on. But having those parameters in place and that real clarity, being able to look at your business through the lens and understand what are we actually doing here? What do we need to achieve? What are those parameters that we need to hit? So if I take that one step further, effectively what I'm describing here is the merchandise financial plan. On the previous slide, I've just, it's just the plan, but you might have come across language, a WYSI. I don't know, particularly if you know anybody from the UK, you'll often hear those guys talking about a WYSI, which effectively stands for weekly sales, stock, and intake. And that's normally a little, merchandise planning tool set up in Excel. My language is a merchandise financial plan. That's probably more closely to what a lot of planning software is. And planning software is not, I think in most cases, appropriate for this audience. It tends to be, a significant investment and aimed more at an enterprise level organization. But that's not to say that you can't achieve a lot in Excel. And we do a lot of work with our clients in Excel. And if I go back to your comment earlier, Lisa, about, wow, Cotton On, massive company, imagine, what that role would have looked like. When I started with Cotton On, I thought they were further along with their planning and their business and how established it might be. When I got there, they actually didn't have planning software as big as a business as they were. And what I did initially was built a merchandise financial plan just for each brand. So, just for Cotton On clothing, Cotton On kids, Body, Ruby, Typo, Factory, T-Bar, and later on we bought Seduce. Sorry, not Seduce, Supre. I built one of these plans, and I'm going to show you a little example of one in a moment, just globally. So I didn't even build one for every country that they were operating in. I literally built one global plan per brand. I didn't even build it down to the levels of their product below that, in the sense of, top, skirts, pants, jackets. It was literally Cotton On kids. So very, very macro. Plus, it was a new, a new thing for the business to do. It wasn't something they had been doing before. But in doing that, I created visibility for them that they hadn't had before. And it gave us the means to embed some thinking and some strategic approach that they hadn't had in place before. And in the first 6 months to a year that I was working with them, and then we did implement planning software after that, but just using those Excel spreadsheets at that very high level, I took 4 to 7 weeks of cover out of every single one of their brands. So how do I sort of explain what that is? If you're not familiar with the term weeks of cover, the amount of sales that you would do in a week, the stock that supports those sales, 4 to 7 weeks of that of stock just removed from the business. And in the process of doing that, we didn't miss a beat on their double-digit comp growth that they were achieving at the time. And we didn't experience any margin fallout either. So effectively, if you just think of those businesses and just going, you know what, there's a whole lot of inventory in here that is just not doing anything for us. It's not being productive. All it's actually doing is tying up our cash and potentially, making it harder for the customer to choose what she actually wants. Just take all of that out of the business. Obviously not in a overnight sense. I always recommend moving things slowly. But we took all of that out of the business and didn't interrupt their trade in any way. And we did that out of an Excel spreadsheet, a merchandise financial plan. Because what it does is it gives you a lens onto the business for you to see sales, margin, and stock all operating together, dynamically connected, KPIs that are helping you get a read on what's going on in your business now and into the future. And it's a super powerful way to look at your business and really be in control, have visibility that's going to inform your decision-making. So I always sort of talk about it as being the financial expression of the product strategy. So, if the product strategy is to, expand into, a new area or a new look, if it's, there might be different pricing things around that product strategy. There might be different customer things and so on. There might be different times of the year that you're going to participate in different events. Whatever that strategy is, it's interpreting that into financial terms and capturing that as that sales plan. So that's what I was referring to a little bit earlier. Sales drives stock. It's first capturing all of that strategy into this is the sales that we think we can do, and then planning the stock to support it. So it's using past and present data to inform the future. And I often think of it like Google Maps. So, we are used to hopping in the car, putting on our Google Maps and saying, right, get me from A to B and get me there the most efficient way. But we also don't expect Google Maps to only take us that path, because along the way, if there's been a traffic jam, we would prefer to detour around it. Or maybe we'd prefer to use tolls or not use tolls, depending on whether we want to get there faster or whether we're managing our budget. All of those things, we expect Google to dynamically adjust and get us there the best way. A merchandise plan needs to be like that as well. It's not a set and forget thing. It's because retail is dynamic, a merchandise financial plan also needs to be dynamic. It needs to be something that you're constantly revisiting, bringing in newer information, what's actually happening, and then reprojecting forward based on that. So very dynamic, very much, not an academic plan that you do nicely in PowerPoint and then you put in a folder and never look at again. It actually becomes the engine room for so much of that decision making, and the figures that get set in your merchandise financial plan flow through to inform how much should I be spending. That's that starting point for your whole range. The numbers that we work with in merchandise planning and retail, they're not as, how do I say, they're friendlier. They're just friendlier than those accounting and financial numbers. And
well, they're probably not as intimidating because, I don't know, hands up in here who hates getting emails from your accountant with how much tax you owe. Like, I think we all have PTSD about like money we owe. So I think it's automatic to assume that stock and cash flow and inventory management is also quite a traumatic subject. For a lot of women, it can be. But I think you're right. Like, I think it's about getting excited about what the numbers show so that you can really optimize the way that you order in future. That's how I would, dramatically surmise a very big topic into like one sentence. You will say it much better than me, Susan.
Oh no, you're so good at a succinct sum up. But at the end of the day, those figures are just telling a story. And that's why I actually do get so excited about them, because I can see the patterns, and I don't expect other people to see the same pattern as I do because I've been doing this for so long. But for me, I sweep my eyes across the page and I'm seeing patterns everywhere. But what I do love is some of the founders that I've worked with who have started off, really quite anxious over working with an Excel spreadsheet like the one I'm about to just show you a bit of a screenshot on. But then through the repetition of us working with them and showing them what we're seeing and tweaking numbers in the sheet and pretty much going, okay, watch this here and watch those there. When I change this, watch how these numbers change. It shows them what the knock-on effect and the relationship between the numbers is, and they start to see the connectivity there. And I've seen them go through this progression from a bit of anxiety to really falling in love with their merchandise financial plan, having it be their sort of that thing in their back pocket all the time, because they can see their whole business in that one place and they can see into the future, and they've got such a sense of calm and control because of it. So brace yourselves. It is a page full of numbers, and this is just to give you a sense of when I talk about a merchandise financial plan, what's in there. So in this one, if you look just across the top there, it's just the months. So that's your time dimension. And, for most of your businesses, I would assume that a month level view would be absolutely adequate. Although, yes, it's very important that we monitor and report on and analyze what's going on at a week level. This is a strategic document, so month is absolutely adequate. And there's enough for us to start seeing trends in that data as well. What you can see down the left-hand side there is where all the metrics sit. So those are just abbreviations, but the first few metrics there are sales. So sales at retail, sales at cost, or you might call that COGS. Then we've got some gross margin numbers, gross margin dollars and percent. Then we work through into purchases or your buy, or whatever you like to call the money that you're spending. And then further down the page would be stock metrics. So your actual stock on hand. And then also some other sort of performance type metrics. So sell through and weeks of cover, maybe a stock turn, those sorts of things that give you a relationship between sales and stock, or sales and stock and margin. And those are all the types of things that give you an insight into the health of your business and into the health of your stock and into the speed at which your stock is turning and those kinds of things. Reading a plan like this is not something I would expect any of you to be able to do without, a little bit of hand holding initially, but it is actually, I'm glad it's a little bit blurry, sort of soft focus. But this is something, when I was saying, I would sit and tweak these numbers and show the person I'm working with what to look at as a result of what I'm adjusting, so that they can see how the one impacts the other. What you could also see in that sort of first column in white there is different versions of measures. So you can see there's a sales at retail for last year. There's a sales retail budget. So budget tending to be what you sort of set out as your, this is, my operating costs are pretty much hanging off this number. I need to be doing this level of sales to make things work. But this is a number that has substance to it. I know what sits behind it. I know how I'm going to achieve that particular number. And then the sales retail this year is more of a dynamic line. That is the line where we would update actual performance and reproject into the future. So if in that first July, for example, it's saying the sales last year was 867K, don't worry about the size of the numbers. The budget was to do 915. So straight away, we can see we were budgeting to do better than the prior year. And then sales this year is at 847K. So just a little bit below last year and quite a bit off budget. So then we got some variance measures there. So we can see 7% actually below budget and 2% below last year, and then others and so on. So those versions are good to look at together because they're giving you reference points. That's the whole reason why I'm explaining those. Working through numbers, whether they're these high-level strategic numbers in a merchandise financial plan, or whether they're the ongoing trade type numbers that you'd look at on a weekly basis, right down at your SKU and size level. For me, the really key thing with how to interpret and use those numbers comes down to relativity and reference points. The numbers aren't necessarily good and bad in and of themselves. The way you find out or figure out, are they good or bad, and what do you want to do about that, is by comparing them to other numbers, comparing them to other numbers that you knew were good because you've already lived that time period, you've already lived that range selling, and you know when this pink dress was, it flew out in a week. I sold this many of it. Now I'm comparing, how is this yellow dress going? How did it do versus the pink one? Because I know the pink one was really good. So if the pink one was doing 20 a week, there's your benchmark. You want your yellow one to be doing something like that. So you're looking for that relativity to compare, to try and figure out what is a good number, and reference points. What can I compare against? And that's what will help us set figures into the future as to what good looks like, what is likely, what is achievable. And that's why we have those different versions in there. In this format, we're capturing your sales, your margin, and your stock in a few different ways and bringing them together so you can see how they all impact on each other now and into the future. And that means you can make decisions into the future. This is an Excel-based little tool, and just reiterating what Lisa's said there as well, there is nothing wrong with using Excel to move your business forward, to build these sorts of tools. It's super effective, it's super flexible, and it means you can really get to what is appropriate and right-sized for your business. But each time I build one of these, I'll build them slightly different because I'm building them to match the business that I'm working with. I do always like to have retail and cost across all of my measures, because what that does is it keeps bringing that margin focus back into the picture. When you've got that relationship between retail and cost, you can always arrive back at margin. And one of the things that is a very key indicator for profitability is the margin in your stock on hand. So we're mostly familiar with the sales margin, which is the gap between your retail and your cost value of your sales. One step on from that, a lot of people are familiar with the margin in the buying decisions that they make. So the difference between retail and cost on what you're buying, purchasing. But what very few people look at is the relationship between retail and cost of the stock that they actually own. It's the same calculation. It's just retail minus cost divided by retail. But that margin in your stock is going to give you a really good indicator as to what can you achieve going forward from a profit point of view. Because if that margin in your stock is low, you straight away know that achieving a high profit margin moving forward is just not achievable. That stock can't work hard enough for you. And those are the sorts of indicators you can see in a tool like this, where you get an early warning signal about your stock starting to build or about your stock starting to devalue. By devalue, you've not taken a markdown, but it's not actually going to work for you. And you can start taking preemptive action. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because it really lets you influence the future. And this is the last technical thing that I have planned to talk about today, but this is what underpins that whole merchandise financial plan. We didn't have stock up on the stock on hand up on the previous screen. We've got it here just as a closing stock in that bottom right-hand corner. But effectively, if you just sort of think of, like if you winding a thread, you know, on a sewing machine, you know, you sort of threading your sewing machine, if you've ever done that. I imagine most of us have, at least at school. You pull on one side and it kind of goes through all those little guides and things and moves the other side. I always think of your stock as being this thread woven through time. And when you pull on it over here, it makes a difference to what's happening at this end. It's all connected. Your stock that you are holding today is connected to your future stock position. So this flow calculation is taking your opening stock, it's subtracting your sales and your markdowns, it's adding in what you're buying, and it's giving you a new closing stock position at the end of this period, so end of the week or end of the month. That closing stock position becomes the opening stock of your next time period, and so on. So that flow, because it's all continuous, is why this whole tool actually comes together and works and gives you that view into the future. So I've really focused just on that one part of the process today, because it's the epicenter. Everything else that you do flows on from that. And if you're monitoring your business in that format, and if you use that as your launch point for all your other business decisions, you've got something to reference against to know how are you going. You've got something that's bringing together all the key elements of your business so that you can really get your arms around it. And you can adjust as you go, and you can be proactive and preemptive about what's down the line. Everything else will start coming together if you get on the front foot in that format. So just for your knowledge, we do have a free resource center called the Planning Pod. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, because it does have some tools and calculators in there that would help you. We've got like a markdown calculator in there. We've got a matrix to help you look at your sell through over time and realize at what point you'd need to take a markdown. We do have a training program, an online training program called Merchandise Planning Foundations. And within that, there is a little module talking through the merchandise financial plan that I've just done now. And they're doing like a live walkthrough on that and showing you that dynamic of sales drive stock. And then just in terms of our services, I know that some of what I've talked about will be unfamiliar and can sound intimidating. The type of support that we would bring to businesses of your sort of size and growth and so on would be our Outsmart solution, which is actually an outsourced planning solution. We literally will come and work with you as if we're part of your business, maybe only a day or two a week, just doing enough to help you get on that track. And also a smart start, so actually building that initial little environment, putting together some of those simple tools to get you on that path so that you've got sound foundations for growth, because that's what it's about. I see businesses rebuilding and rebuilding because they just didn't have the infrastructure in place. They just didn't have that framework in place to sustain it.